So today we're going to cover loops. So the format of today will be the same exercises as last week, but instead of doing them manually, we'll do them more programmatically. So we're going to do them using a loop. So to start with, we'll open our script editor as always, and I'll make this half the screen so you can see a little bit easier. Zoom in so you can read this. So there's a example function here. If you ever get stuck, you can refer to that when you're doing the exercise after. But for now, perfect. So the question we have is, given this set of sales, how do we get the total amount? It's pretty straightforward in Sheets. It's just, you can use the built-in function of sum, enter your array, your range, and easy. So to redo this in Google Sheets, we're going to write a custom function. So the way we'll do that is we'll first declare it, function. So we need to come up with a useful name. It will do sum, but more specifically, we're only going to use it for this one purpose. So I'm going to call it sum of sales data. So open parentheses, and in the parentheses we're going to have the range that we expect to input. So we can call this sales data, and actually we can just call it sales, because it's just a list of sales. Okay, so open curly brackets, close curly brackets. Now there's a couple of things I wanted to point out here. One, we're calling, as previously with the arrays, we're calling sales to imply that it's an array. And then we're going to return a sum of the sales, sum of sales. Cool. And then we need to declare a sum of sales, so we can say let sum of sales, use correct indenting, equal, starting off with 0, and then in this part of the code we're going to add each item in sales. Excuse me. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to show you is what is a loop. So previously in the last lesson we went through this array of sales one by one and added it manually to the sum of sales. But this time we want to do this in a much more concise manner. So the way we can do this is with a loop. This is called a for loop. So the way it works is you write for, open close parentheses, we create a variable. So we can call it whatever you want, but the commonly accepted way to do this is to call a variable I. I stands for iterable, I guess. And then semicolon, so let I equal, and then the initial number, which for us will be 0. Because remember, in arrays, 0 is the first item. We're going to run, so the next thing is the condition. So what this means is this loop is going to run until this condition is false. So we want I to be less than the length of the array. So for the moment, we know that it's only going to take 5, so we're just going to write 5. And then semicolon. So what this means is we're going to start with I is equal to 0. Easy, the same as any other variable. The next part says as long as I is less than 5, please continue this loop. Keep it going. The next thing we want is at the end of each loop, we need to change something so that we don't get stuck in an endless loop. So what we want to do is I++. This is equivalent to I equals I plus 1. So we can write this, or there's a few ways you can do this in JavaScript. Like for example, you can do plus equals 1, which means take I and equals I plus 1, but the way we are going to do it for now is I plus plus. So what this is going to do is start at 0. It's going to run our code. Our code sits in the curly brackets, so it's going to run whatever code we put in here. And then it's going to check, is I less than 5 and I equals 0, so the answer is true. Okay, so we're going to run the loop, run this loop, then we're going to add 1 to I, so now I equals 1. Is I less than 5, so I will be 1, yes, so we're going to run the loop again. So in this loop, what we want to do is add sales to sum of sales. So the way we did that last time, the way we'll do it this time is, remember sales came in as a two-dimensional array. So that means an array that has each item is an array. So 0 is the first item. And what we're going to do, just to make sure of this, make sure that this is still the case, remember we don't use console log in Google Apps Script the way we do in normal JavaScript, but we use logger.log. So logger.log, and we want to log sales. So for now, let's remove this from our loop. So so the loop is going to run nothing 5 times. That's fine. I don't mind. What we want to know is, what does our sales look like? What is the structure of it? View the executions. Okay, its current status is running. It's taking some time. I don't know what it's doing now, but it's finished the log. So it's the same as previously. We have an array. So this whole thing is one array, and then each item in the array is also an array, and those array only contain one item. So to access this, we want to access the first item in the array, which is this, and then we want to access the first item in that array, which is this. So we say 0, 0. So we can say sum of sales equals plus equals, because we want to add it, which is the same as saying plus equals is the same as saying sum of sales equals sum of sales plus this thing. We want sales 0, 0. So this is what we did last time, and then the next line we did was the same, but we increased to 1 here. Now we have a loop, and this should be indented by 2 to show that it's within this for loop. Just fix that as well, make it look a bit prettier. Okay, so the way we can run this, because I is equal to 0, and then the next time I is equal to 1, we can make I this and remove here, and then we can run our code. So we'll save it and we'll check. So it's already given us the correct answer. So what it's doing here is, so remove this, make it prettier. Okay, so sum of sales data takes sales as an input parameter, which it currently is taking this array, which we know is a two-dimensional array, which is an array where each item is an array. We've got sum of sales equals 0. For indicates a for loop. We're creating a variable called I, and we're setting it to 0. Next thing we're saying is this loop will run as long as I is less than 5. So as many times as it takes, so long as I is less than 5. Then what we're doing is saying when you've finished each loop, this is what you should do. So we're saying we should add 1 to I. So we could also write I equals I plus 1. That would do the same thing. demonstrate, it shouldn't change. Yeah, cool. So it's doing the same thing, but to be more concise, we can do plus equals 1, the same as we've done here. But to be super concise, we just want plus plus, which means add 1 to this. The reason why there's this shortcut is because it's very common in programming to say we just want to add 1. Okay, so each time we run this, I equals 1 more. So the first time it equals 0, and we get the first item in sales. Second time it equals 1, we get the second item in sales. Third time it equals 2, we get the third item in sales until I equals 5. And once I equals 5, JavaScript says, is 5 less than 5? No. Stop. Then move on here, which is returning this function. So we're returning sum of sales. Okay, I want to fix one thing here because we've said this is sum of sales, and then we've declared our input prop as sales. So it's a bit confusing calling it sum of sales data because there's no sales data that we're talking about. So to be more precise in our language, we're just going to call it sum of sales. You'll see if we save this, this breaks, fine, update the name, no problem, great. Okay, so I wanted to show you one more thing while we're here, and show you what JavaScript's actually doing. So we can put in here a logger, so logger.log, and we can remove sales, and we remove this functionality. So all this is doing now is logging whatever we say in here, and what we want to say is I. So what I want to do is run this function within, not within the spreadsheet, but just within Google Apps Script Editor, and see what I is equal to further demonstrate what this does. So we'll save it. We can select the function that we want to run, sum of sales. We can run it, and then we can see in our logs we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as described. Cool. So we'll undo our changes, make sure this still works, 270, and we'll move on to the next exercise. Okay, so part 2. So again, this is the same exercise as last week. We have an array of sales data. We have a set tax rate, and we want to find out what the tax rate is. So the way we do that in Sheets is we say this number times the tax, and the tax we need to lock into place, plus again the tax, the pre-tax data, and then we're going to draw it down, and Google Sheets will repeat it. The way we want to do this in Google Script is we want to return an array, so that array will fill this column, or these rows in this column. Okay, so our function should be called we call it post-tax costs, because this is pre-tax costs. So we can call it get post-tax costs, and we're saying it's a plural at the end because we want to indicate that we are returning an array. So get post-tax costs, takes an input parameter and then runs the function. The input parameter should be pre-tax sales. So same as sales, but we're specifying this pre-tax, and then we want to return post-tax sales, and we need to declare it. So we can say let post-tax sales equal a empty array, because we remember this needs to be an array. So we can start with an empty array, and then we can push items to this array. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to have a for loop. We can just copy it, or I'll write it out again. It doesn't matter. We'll copy it. It's good practice to write it out again, but not time for practicing now. You can practice in your exercises. So what we want to do is we want to add something to post-tax sales. So instead of this, what we want to do is say post-tax sales dot push. Remember, push is an inbuilt function on any array. So if something is an array, we can run dot push on it, and this inbuilt function means that we can add whatever's in this parentheses to the array as an item. And this can be another array, it can be a variable, it can be a string, it can be a number. Just add 7, and if we run our script, you can guess what we're going to get as an answer. So we're setting our pre-tax costs. Oh, we also need to give it the tax. We haven't specified this yet, so we'll just do that now. Tax, 2 input parameters. Save this. We'll run our formula, our function, and we've got 77777. The reason why is because we've put it in this loop and it's run this 5 times. The reason why it has 7 euros is just because of the Google Sheets formatting. It's nothing to do with what's being returned. It's just returning a single number 7 with no formatting. Okay, so we don't want to push 7. What we want to push is our pre-tax sales and the first item in that array, so 0, and the first item in that array, which will be 0 as well, plus, times tax, plus, again, this pre-sales tax, the first item in the first array. So if we run this, we'll see we add the first item in the first array 5 times. We don't want to add the first item in the first array, we want to add each item in the array. So to do that, we'll replace 0 with I. And remember, I, we're using the same letter. And the reason why we use the same letter every time is because when other programmers are reading your code, it's easy to understand what I is. So save this, and our function is already done. Just to show you can call it anything, we'll call it poop because it's funny. And then we can use poop as our iterable. Reference I is not defined because we're making sure I is less than 5, not poop. So we want to make sure that poop is less than 5, and we want to add 1 to poop. Right now, saved it. No I. Reference I is not found. Save. Run this function, please. Okay, we've got a I lost somewhere. Line 22, I is not defined. Well, we're not calling I. Well, anyway, it should work. Maybe Google Apps Script doesn't like it when we say poop instead of I, so we'll change it back to I. Well, now this isn't working. Let's refresh. Okay, it's working again. We're going to reopen our script editor. Okay, cool. So next part, let's practice again. We've already done part 2. Well, part 3. Come on. Okay, so part 3 is in lesson data. All this script does, it's a recorded macro. I'll show you one day what a recorded macro is, but what this essentially does is what I'm doing right now. It just does it quicker and faster because it's recorded. And I thought it would be fancier. But so this is the same as what we did. It's working now. How frustrating. Okay, so this is the task we're doing. It's the same task that we did last week with the arrays. But again, we're going to run the same thing but with a loop. The way we do this in JavaScript, in Google Sheets, is where you can use regex replace. Regex replace. I'm not going to go through regex again because we talked about it last lesson. The text that we want to replace is this one. The regular expression that we want to replace is just name, exactly, and the thing we want to replace it with is whatever is in this column. And we want to lock the message so that we can drag this down. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing but in Google Sheets. So we can say function add name to messages. It takes 2 parameters, so it'll be the name, names, because it's an array, and second is the message. Single, so we assume that it's a single thing, and by message you can pretty safely assume it's going to be a string, and a string just means it's letters, it's not a number, it's not a variable. That's what a string is. Okay, so again we want to return messages with names, and declare this, let messages with names equal an empty array, because we want to return an array of 5 things. And then we want to run a for loop, so it'll be the same as this, use again. Okay, so we're running this 5 times again. But this time what we want to do is push the message with the name to this empty array. So array.push, whatever we put in this parentheses is what we're going to push to our array. And again, because it's in this for loop, we're going to do it 5 times. So we can push, well, now we've used poop before, so we'll use it again. And we're going to add the names to messages, tests, and make sure that it's all working properly. So we want names, which will be this array, and we want a message, which will be here. Great, perfect. Okay, so what we actually want is the message, but we want to replace, and again we discussed this last time, replace is an inbuilt function on any string. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to mdn replace JavaScript, and you'll see string.prototype.replace. It's a bit confusing, but what this means is you can run this function on any string. You can do this, use this same website for any built-in JavaScript functions. It's a really great resource. So if you forget how to write a for loop, you can do for loop mdn, and you'll see a for loop. You could do array push JavaScript, and again, MDN will explain what push does, give you an example, and let you run the example. You can change these so that you can test out your real example. Unexpected token, comma, because I removed the string, I didn't remove the comma. Yeah, cool. Okay, so what this is doing is replacing, actually, let's have a look at the documentation on how to do it. So what we want to do is it takes two things. The first is the regex, or you can just use a string if you don't want to use regex. We're just going to use a string. And the second thing is what you're going to replace it with. So we want to replace name with our names and the first item in the first array. So we know this is James, and by now we know that to do this, if we save it, we're just going to run James 5 times. It's not what we want. We want to run the iterable, the I, in the loop. So then this is running 5 times, and each time the I is becoming one higher number. Save it, and it's working as required. So I wanted to show you a couple of other little things before we finish. The first thing is in Google Sheets directly, you have to use a double quotation mark for every string. You can't use a single quotation mark. It doesn't work. It doesn't like it. It fails. But in Google Script or in JavaScript, you can use a single quotation mark or a double quotation mark. They mean the same thing. This still works. You can also use a backtick, just so you know what all the options are. Just make sure this does work. It concerns me that this didn't light up as a different color. So we'll remove the function and then we'll run it again. Yeah, cool. Okay, so it is working. So this is a backtick. Anyway, so we'll keep it the same. One more thing I want to show you is we know that this array is going to be 5 because we can see it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But sometimes you don't know how long it's going to be. Most of the time you don't know how long it's going to be with a loop. So what you can do is built in, so instead of 5, we can use our array of names. We can call this built-in function called length. It's not really a built-in function, it's a built-in value of a function, of an array. You can find out more again here. Array length MDN, and you can read about it. This is not a function, it's just a value. But any array, it will tell you exactly how long it is. And yeah, so to tell you this has got 4 items. So if we say names.length, we know we're going to get 5 items, so we can run it. So in this case, say if we don't have 5 items, we've got 4 items. We're still adding we're still giving 5 to the formula, but we're going to change that now. So we're saying to 33, just 4, and it will just run it 4 times. Yeah, so now our for loop is a lot more flexible, and it will run as many times as you say. Cool. Okay, done. So you can find the link to the exercises and let me know if you've got any problems.